Okay, it's time for the mailbag. I'm very excited to introduce my dad. Dad, welcome to the show. I'm very grateful you decided to have me as your child. So we can jump right into the mailbag. Lots of questions for you. A lot of people asking questions for my dad today. Okay, McGuire asks, "Dear Mr. Shapiro, what do you think is the best lesson that baseball can teach our society morally, socially, and or politically?" Thanks, from a huge fan. Why don't you give your answer to that one, then I have an answer for that one as well.
Well, we talked about this in the beginning of the book, in the beginning of our book, where I talked about how baseball moves at the speed of life. Unlike the other sports, there's no clock that runs out at any time. You don't know when it's going to run out. And so because of that, I think it teaches patience. And I think that's something that's sadly lacking in every way, in the political and in almost every sphere, is that people are in a rush. And my own personal belief is that has stemmed from a lack of faith in God.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with my father, so my father speaks for me. But I tend to agree with my dad on all this stuff, which is why we get along really well. The only things that I would add as far as baseball and its values for life is not only the speed of the game, but also, like most sports, it's a meritocracy, so there's no affirmative action in baseball. If you're good at it, you're good at it. If you're bad at it, then you don't make the majors. And also, there is a bounce-back mentality. Unlike most of the other sports, it's played daily. So you lose one day, you win the next, and that means that you'd better get back up on your feet if something bad happens, and if you don't take that lesson to heart, you're going to have a pretty miserable life. Okay, here is another question. April asks, "Hi Ben, I have a question for your dad. What should we tell our smart kids when they are being bullied?"
There are a lot of options here. One is obviously to try and fight back, but very often that's not the case. I hate bullying because I hate anything that does not protect the innocence of children. I hate when the innocence of children is violated. So one is to fight back, as in the movie My Bodyguard, which is great. The original,
with our friend Adam Baldwin, yeah.
That's right, great movie. The other is have your father intervene, as I have done.
That's a really good story. I think I've told that story on the air. For those who don't know this story, I was really badly bullied in high school. And I was 2 years younger, and I hadn't hit my growth spurt. And yes, Trumpkins, I actually am 5'9", but this is when I was like 5.
He is 5'9".
I was actually
I'm
5.
6 feet. He's 3 inches shorter.
Okay, so I was like 5. I was maybe 5'1", and I was maybe 115, 120 pounds. And there were a bunch of bigger kids who were picking on me, and physically hitting me, bullying me, and it was pretty brutal. And my dad actually came into and the administration wouldn't do anything about it because it was a private school, and the kids' parents were rich. We weren't as wealthy, so they didn't want to actually do anything about it. So my dad called a meeting with the kids and with the principals, and actually turned to the kids and said, "Listen, my son is smaller than you, but I am your size." And some of these kids were pretty big. He said, "I'm your size, and I'm willing to take you out in the parking lot, and I will fight you one by one, and I also have a ball-peen hammer in the trunk of my car, and if you go down, you're not getting back up." And that was pretty much the end of that particular problem.
Yeah,
so,
I said if you ever touch a hair on his head again, you don't want to be looking behind you.
Yeah, and with now having my own 2 kids, I feel like exactly.
But there
the
are
same
some
way.
cases where you can't do that, and some cases where the school will not protect the child. In that case, you need to find another school for your child. If the school's not going to do its job, if the school's not going to protect your child, then get the child the heck out of there and find some place where they will.
Alrighty, Gary says, "Hi Ben, my mother has recently informed me of my family heritage may include Jewish descent. I have no idea if this is accurate or how it affects my current belief system. I'm a Christian that has accepted Christ as my risen Savior. Do I have an obligation to seek out what this possible heritage link is? Is ignorance bliss in religion?" So from a Jewish perspective, you do have an obligation. This one isn't really for my dad, but from a Jewish perspective, you do have an obligation to check out your Jewish heritage, because if you are Jewish, technically, then under Judaism you are still Jewish, even if you've accepted another religion. So according to Judaism, Andrew Klavan is still Jewish, even though Andrew is converted to Christianity. From a general non-Jewish kind of secularist perspective, it's a free country. You can do whatever you want. From a moral perspective, I always think that you should think through your beliefs in the best possible way, which is why I've studied Christianity, and why I've looked at Buddhism, and why I look at Islam, and why I think that it's important to know a lot about other religions, so you know what you believe and believe what you believe. Okay. Diana says, "Question to Ben's dad. What did you guys talk about at the dinner table when Ben was 10? Couldn't be politics, law, policies, or could it?" And she's looking for some parenting advice.
We talked about everything. One of the rules I had was that I never thought that I had all the answers. So I would ask friends of mine who were very intelligent people they'd be over for dinner, and I'd encourage you to ask questions of them. Because they were more expert in certain areas than I was, although we talked about everything. We talked about politics, we talked about music, classical music, we talked about sports a lot. This is part of an essential lesson, I think, and that is that it is imperative that parents take their child's questions seriously. I always took your questions seriously, and your sisters, and your questions seriously. And I think that's vital. I think it's vital so that the child feels respected. And no matter what the questions, it may seem silly to you, but it's not silly to them. And I think that's really important.
Okay, so here's another one. This is a live mailbag question from Emmanuel. Papa Shapiro, when did you realize you had such a special kid in Ben? I have to read that because it says I'm special. So when did you realize that I was so awesome? Dad?
Well, when you were 3 days old, actually. Because all our children were C-section babies. You were the first. Mommy came home when you were 3 days old, and we put you on the table, and you were staring up the light. And I said to Mommy, either he's brain damaged or he's a genius. I'm not sure which.
We still don't know.
Yeah, the jury's still out. But there were certain things that you were doing very early on. You were very articulate. You were very rational. Can I tell the vacuum cleaner story?
Sure.
Okay. Very quickly, my wife was vacuuming in one room, and Ben was about 2, and she called for me, David, and I came in, and Ben was standing on the vacuum cleaner and would not get off. And I said, Ben, if you don't get off the vacuum cleaner, it's going to break. And if it breaks, I don't know how to fix it, which means I'm going to have to hire somebody, which means I'm going to have to pay them, which means if I pay them, I won't have enough money to take us all to Disneyland. You understand the consequences of all the things of what you're doing and how we won't be able to go to Disneyland? He was off in a heartbeat. And I realized at that point that you were just rational, that I could be very rational with you.
My daughter's even smarter than this. She was doing the same thing, and I said the same thing to her, and she said, just buy a new vacuum cleaner. What's the problem?
Difference between daughters and sons.
Yeah, exactly. Ricky says to Ben's dad, what do you and Ben have the most in common? So I have an answer for this one also, but you go ahead.
Okay, this goes to something it's very important to me, and that is loyalty. I'm sure everybody knows this for people who follow Ben, but the bottom line is he's very loyal, very as I am, to God, to the truth, to America, to the Jewish people, to his family. It's about loyalty and never backing off on that. Loyalty to me means everything, to all those things. I mean, it's like truth, justice, and the American way. Mm-hmm. You know? I mean, is there anything better than that? No, I mean, God is behind all of that. God has to be behind all of that. But truth, justice, and the American way, being loyal to those things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we basically have the same answer. I mean, you can see my dad is a very passionate guy, and that's where I got it. So that's definitely what we have most in common, aside from our love for the White Sox.
Oh, yeah.
Which definitely ranks high on the list. Okay, David says, David and Ben, I have my first child on the way. I know the intellect is inherited as well as shaped. Do you have any recommendations for intellectual stimulation of children prior to formal schooling? It seems like you did fairly well with Ben.
Yeah, well, I remember when you were 3, we sat on the driveway and I took some chalk and you were drawing the letters with the chalk, so you could learn the letters, and you learned to read very early on, and I think that was primarily, the primary thing that I focused on, was helping you learn to read, and your sisters too. Reading is everything. Reading is everything. I mean, you took that adage that John Quincy Adams, was it John Adams who told John Quincy Adams?
Yeah.
Never
leave home without a poet in your pocket.
Right. So I
don't like poetry, so it's a book. But yes.
I mean, it's a very funny thing. We were sitting at dinner one night recently, and there's a scene in Godfather Part 3 where Michael Corleone he's furious because he's trying to get out of being in the mob, and there's some murders, and he says, they're dragging me back. It's a very famous scene. They're dragging me back in. And one night we were sitting at dinner, and Ben happened to be reading a book, and I said, Ben? He said, nothing. Ben? Nothing. I turned to him, I said, this is like Michael Corleone with you in the book. You're trying to drag me into a conversation. I'm reading here. So
yeah, I realize how irritating I am, because my daughter actually does the exact same thing. She has a central focus, and she will not be budged from her central focus. It drives her mom nuts. So there's that. Okay, final question here from Dakota. Hi, Ben. My question is for your father and yourself. I've heard you mention in the past that your family wasn't always Orthodox. So, Mr. Shapiro, what were some of the driving forces behind you deciding to become Orthodox? And Ben, how much of an impact did that have on shaping your outlook on social life and your political views? So you first, what made our family Orthodox? And then I'll talk about how that sort of shaped my viewpoint.
That goes back to loyalty. That goes back to, I feel it's incumbent, as a Jew, I feel it's incumbent on me to be loyal to all of my ancestors who kept this enormously important thing alive. I owe that to them. They lived and died. Some of them died in painful ways to keep this alive. And so when I was growing up, even though I wasn't religious, I looked at Jews who were religious, and I thought, okay, they're doing it right. I may not be doing it, but they're doing it right, and I want to get there someday. I want to be able to pay homage to my ancestors and to God by doing it, by practicing Judaism authentically. Practicing it authentically.
And I think that that's actually translated for me in terms of, I believe that people who are Orthodox in Christianity or Orthodox in Judaism, or authentically, deeply patriotic about the Constitution of the United States, they're keeping alive a heritage, a Judeo-Christian heritage that is vital to keep alive. And so orthodoxy for me has meant every day, every action I take is supposed to be a living testament to the God who bequeathed us a Judeo-Christian value system that has allowed a country like America to rise to the top of the world and remain there. And the minute that we lose that, then we lose everything. So I think that us living in that way is what has allowed America to become great and will allow America to remain great. And if you don't think it's that great right now, allow it to become great again.
Yeah, I used to say to all you guys growing up, there's two phrases that religious Jews use. They'll say something's a Kiddush Hashem, something's a Chilul Hashem. A Kiddush Hashem is something that sanctifies God's name. A Chilul Hashem is something that desecrates God's name. And I said, remember, every action you take, and you're not always going to not always do it right, but every action you take is one of those two things. You're either sanctifying God's name or you're desecrating God's name. So be conscious of what you're doing when you're out there.
Well, Dad, I love you, and this is the book that if you want to buy a copy of.
We didn't even talk about the White Sox.
We didn't even talk about the White Sox, but if you want to read about the White Sox, then you can read about the White Sox here, because this is everything you would ever need to know about the only season that matters in human history. 2005, when the White Sox won the World Series, book by me and my pops, and you can get that over at dailywire.com. When you become an annual subscriber, you can get it signed by me, or you can get it at amazon.com right now. Dad, I love you. Thanks for coming on the show.